That's the thing about freaking Traitors is it's really returning me to the Bachelor moment that we
Yeah,
had.
don't you miss it a little? I keep meaning to ask you this. Don't you miss it?
Well, I lost interest because I'm just like, listen, I had some of the best
Yeah.
of The Bachelor. I
You
saw
saw
what's her
Rachel
name?
cry her eyelashes
Cry
off.
her eyelashes off. I saw Ari take back his proposal to Becca Kufrin.
You really
I saw Peter and Hannah fucking a windmill and like I saw Becca break the bed with that one dude. Like
Oh, yeah.
I saw some incredible things. I'm like, it's not. We peaked.
It's so true.
Yes, I've had the odd complaint, but on the whole, I've been a saint. To those poor unfortunate souls.
Hello, and welcome to Poor Unfortunate Podcast. I'm Caroline Ametti.
And I'm Conor Perkins. This is the Disney podcast for grown-ups where we shoot the shit about Disney the way that you do with your friends. Welcome to all of our returning listeners. It's great having you back here with us. And welcome to any new listeners. Thank you so much for hitting play. Please also remember to hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening to the podcast. That way all of our episodes download to your device and you don't miss out on anything. And then everybody, once we get to the end of this episode, make sure that you hit 5 stars, leave a written review wherever you're listening to the podcast. That way we're seeing search results. It helps other people find the podcast. And make sure that they hit play because your review could be the difference between them hitting play or passing us by. And then one extra step, just hit the little share button and send this to a friend who you think might like this because we're talking about some pretty great stuff today that I think a lot of people are probably going to have some opinions on. The other thing I'm going to say is after you've shared it with people, then make sure that you go onto social media and make sure that you're following us. We are at Poor Unfortunate Podcast on all of the places. If you're not someone who sticks around to the end, we're going to tell you right now what our social media handle is. All right, let's tell the people what we're doing today. This is our Showdown episode.
We're back to our Showdown. Yes. So this topic, like Conor just said, might be of interest to people who maybe aren't like super, super Disney people like a lot of us are, because today we, inspired by the continued Wicked craze of our lives, Wicked is still very much in this moment.
It'll be premiering on Peacock on March 21st.
Yes. So with all of our talk about Wicked, and if you didn't listen to our Wicked bonus episode, we have that for you. So just scroll back a little and you'll see that. When we were talking about Wicked, remembered that Oz the Great and Powerful was a movie that existed. That is a Disney movie. Mm-hmm. And then we remembered that there is another Disney Oz movie, which is Return to Oz from the 1980s. So we thought those are literally only, well, we have the Muppets doing Oz as well. Let's not forget about that. Yeah. But those are Disney's 2 Oz films. So we were like, we absolutely have to put them in a showdown and find out which one is the winner. So that's what we're going to do today.
We've had this thing in the works since like November.
Yeah.
We've had this idea.
Yeah.
So we're finally doing it. So if you haven't seen Return to Oz or Oz the Great and Powerful, warning, spoilers are ahead. So you should take an opportunity to see these films at least once in your life, I think. And so we'll take a little pause right here so that you can go and you can watch those. They're both on Disney Plus.
Yeah, both on Disney Plus.
We'll be here when you get back. And welcome back.
Woohoo.
Alrighty. So as usual, we're going to start with some background information, and then we are going to look at these 2 films, their strengths and weaknesses in both story and characters, and then in the design, and then sort of overall, like how well those things contribute towards executing Oz from Disney. Like how the story, how the characters, how the design are portraying Oz.
Yep. So before we get started, we also just wanted to give you all this quick little summary of the connection between Disney and Oz, because there's a pretty like storied and strong connection there. So Walt Disney himself planned to produce an animated film based on the first of L. Frank Baum's Oz books after the 1937 success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But Baum's estate had sold the film rights to that book to Samuel Goldwyn, who then, of course, resold them to Louis B. Mayer in 1938. MGM, as we know, created the iconic film, which was allegedly greenlit because of the success of Snow White. So then in 1954, when the film rights to Baum's remaining 13 Oz books were made available, Walt Disney Productions acquired them first for use in Walt Disney's television series Disneyland, which then led to a proposed live-action film, The Rainbow Road to Oz, which was abandoned and never completed. Then, after Return to Oz in 1985, Disney lost the film rights to the Oz books, and they subsequently reverted to the public domain. So Disney has just been dancing around Oz for quite some time.
Yeah. And then also in MGM Studios at the time, the Great Movie Ride featured a huge Wizard of Oz scene.
Yeah. I miss it.
Which we miss. Yeah. So we're going to start with Return to Oz because that comes first.
Mm-hmm.
So Return to Oz, this premiered June 21st, 1985. It was produced by Paul Maslansky. It is directed by Walter Murch, who is a renowned sound and film editor of films like Apocalypse Now, The Godfather Parts 1 through 3, and Ghost. The screenplay is by Walter Murch and Gil Dennis. It's based on The Marvelous Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz by L. Frank Baum. And the music is by David Shire, who did All the President's Men, Zodiac, and The Conversation. It stars, among others, Nicole Williamson as Dr. J.B. Worley / the Gnome King, Jean Marsh as Nurse Wilson / Princess Mombi, Piper Laurie as Aunt Em, Michael Sundin, Tim Rose, and Sean Barrett as Tick-Tock, Brian Henson and Stuart Harvey Wilson as Jack Pumpkinhead, Lyle Conway and Stephen Norrington as the Gump, Mac Wilson and Denise Breyer as Bellina, Emma Ridley as Ozma, and Fairuza Balk as Dorothy. The budget for this film was $28 million, and the box office was $11.1 million.
Oof.
So this is considered a box office flop.
Mm-hmm.
It was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. It has a 6.1 out of 10 on IMDb, a 58% tomato meter score, and a 71% popcorn meter audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. It received very mixed reviews, and it was considered to be a box office flop. Many critics said that although the film was very faithful to its source material, the tone and overall content may be considered too dark and frightening for young audiences. So many viewers came to this film expecting a direct sequel to the 1939 MGM film, given its title. However, they felt that the film never quite recaptured the magic of that original film. So years after the fact, it remains a cult classic and one of the best dark fantasy films. In honor of dark fantasy films, I'm currently wearing my Dark Crystal Spirit jersey.
Yes, you are.
So I'll give you a quick plot synopsis. So considered to be an unofficial sequel to the 1939 MGM film, The Wizard of Oz, Return to Oz follows an insomniac Dorothy who returns to the land of Oz. Once there, she finds the Emerald City to have fallen and the land of Oz conquered by the wicked Gnome King and his accomplice, Princess Mombi. Dorothy must restore Oz and rescue the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion with her new friends Bellina, Tick-Tock, Jack Pumpkinhead, and the Gump. And that's Return to Oz.
Yeah, baby.
Hit us with that good Oz the Great and Powerful.
Let's talk about her. So Oz the Great and Powerful was released on March 8th, 2013. It is directed by Sam Raimi of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films, if you are familiar. The screenplay is by David Lindsay Abaire. Hello, theater nerds, rise up.
Mm-hmm.
And Mitchell,
Rabbit hole.
Rabbit hole, baby. And Mitchell Kapner, with a story by Mitchell Kapner based on the Oz book series by L. Frank Baum, of course. It is produced by Joe Roth with music by the one and only Danny Elfman. The budget for the film was $125 million, and the box office was a whopping $493.3 million worldwide.
People were waiting for Oz.
Yeah, the highest grossing Oz-related film until Wicked came along. Wow.
Yeah,
people love Oz. The film stars, among others, James Franco as Oscar, Michelle Williams as Annie/Glinda, Mila Kunis as Theodora, Rachel Weisz as Evanora, Zach Braff as Finley/Frank, Joey King as the voice of the China Girl, Bill Cobbs as Master Tinker, and Tony Cox as Nuck. The reception, it has a 6.3 on IMDb and a more accurate, I would say, 56% on Rotten Tomatoes. And here's a quick little, just straight from Walt Disney Studios plot summary for you. Oscar Diggs, a small-time circus magician with dubious ethics, is hurled away from dusty Kansas to the vibrant land of Oz. At first, he thinks he's hit the jackpot. Fame and fortune are his for the taking. That all changes, however, when he meets 3 witches, Theodora, Evanora, and Glinda, who are not convinced he is the great wizard everyone's been expecting. Reluctantly drawn into the epic problems facing the land of Oz and its inhabitants, Oscar must find out who is good and who is evil before it is too late. Putting his magical arts to use through illusion, ingenuity, and even a bit of wizardry, Oscar transforms himself not only into the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, but into a better man as well. I don't know if I agree that that's what happens in that movie.
That's a very kind
But
plot
thank you,
synopsis.
Walt Disney Studios, for trying on that one.
That they did a fantastic
really did.
job with that plot summary, because that makes me really want to watch that movie.
know.
All right, so now let's dive into sort of picking these 2 films apart. First, we're going to look
I like that that's how
at-
you phrased it. I'm dying.
I'm not going to lie here. I personally have a very, very strong winner here for
I
me.
mean, same, spoiler.
So a lot of this is kind of going to be very similar to the first Showdown we ever did, where it's a lot of it is points as to why one is better than the other, as opposed
Yeah.
to really seeing fairly who's going to be better than the other. Because
Yeah.
we all know Oz the Great and Powerful is a load of horse shit in a film.
But you know what? I hope this is a relief for the listeners, because we have ended some showdowns just like not really being able to make a decision. So
Truly.
this is great. This is great.
Truly. And I say this with as much love as you can say something is a load of horseshit, because as we've established, I was a very firm apologist for Oz the Great and Powerful at the time. I used to play the Temple Run Oz the Great and Powerful game on
Wow.
my phone. Like, I was like, yes. And really what I think it was just like Oz deprivation was like at
Sure.
its peak for me.
Yeah.
But we're going to start and we're going to dive into these films. We're going to pick them apart and we're going to start with the story and the characters. So let's go through the strengths and weaknesses of Return to Oz, and then we'll go through the strengths and weaknesses of Oz the Great and Powerful.
Fantastic.
So some of the strengths that we see in the story and the characters. One of the main big things that I see is the real world versus the Oz parallels are slightly different in Return to Oz than we see them in the original Wizard of Oz. So I think it's
Mhm.
really smart that this film doesn't follow the same formula of the Wizard of Oz, with all of Dorothy's allies being people she knew back at home. Instead of Dorothy's allies being direct parallels to people from her world, they're represented in inanimate objects. TikTok comes from the electrotherapy machine. Jack Pumpkinhead comes from the jack-o'-lantern brought to her room by the mysterious girl, Ozma. And the Gump from, I believe, from a mounted deer head on one of the walls in one of the scenes. I was trying to like track where the
Oh.
Gump comes from. And that's like the only thing that I could see when I was like really picking it apart. But maybe. And then to even further flip the script on the story, the people from the real world that show up in Oz are almost all exclusively villainous characters. The head nurse, Nurse Wilson, being Princess Mombi, Dr. Worley being the Gnome King, and even the orderly responsible for wheeling Dorothy's stretcher into the operating room as the lead wheeler and the Gnome King's assistant. This film very much honors that sort of real world Ozian reflection that we expect to see in Oz stories, but it does it in a new way. So it just doesn't feel like a rehash of the first story / film. I'd say the same thing about Dorothy's entrance to Oz. So we get a storm, but it's not another tornado that's taking her house. It's a lightning storm and a flooded river. So now we're expanding the lore of Oz with a new way in. So it's same but different. Same but different. And then also the fact that she has an animal companion mirrors the experience from the Wizard of Oz, but this time it's not Toto. And I think we get to see Toto at his absolute badass best in the Wizard of Oz. So we already would have an idea of how he would react or contribute to the story. So by giving another animal that chance, we get to see a fresh perspective of Oz. And with the addition of Bellina's ability to speak, a lot of fun, witty
yeah,
repartee.
yep.
Also, looking at some of the story structure and themes, this is another thing that I think is working really, really well. So, this is one of the only times that someone has attempted to adapt any of the other Oz books. In doing so, a lot of the effort of crafting a story that fits within the world of Dorothy and Oz, that's taken care of because you're using actual canon source material. And the choice to use both The Marvelous Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz works really well in this scenario. It's giving us compelling companions and villains, as well as themes that continue to build on those that are present in The Wizard of Oz. And the film is at its core a metaphor for trauma and holding on to childhood in the face of societal expectations. The adults of Dorothy's world are encouraging her to grow up and leave her experience of Oz in the past. The Gnome King does the same when he pressures Dorothy to leave Oz and forget everything about it. And in the face of this, Dorothy's primary focus of the film is to hold on to these experiences at all costs. Dorothy acts as a trauma victim, preserving the experience while trying to convince others of their reality. She traverses an Oz where her fondest memories have been reduced to stone and trinkets in the way that our own childhood dreams usually take on simplified, fragile, trivial forms as we grow up. Her anxiety around the expectations of motherhood and caretaking that come with growing up plays out in Mombi and the creation of Jack Pumpkinhead. This is an Oz that is taking all of Dorothy's fears and anxieties and manifesting them in the same way that her previous trip manifested her wonder and her dreams. So it's a sophisticated evolution of Dorothy's story and one that most people probably wouldn't attempt to adapt. And so that's why I think is really working here. Like we're doing some shit. It's very jarring, it's very different, but we're doing something here.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. You said it in so much more of an eloquent way than I even had put together in my mind. But yes, I just think the concept itself is so solid. Of course, Dorothy is going to have a hard time readjusting to the real world after Oz. What does it look like? I want to know. Like we're starting off strong, and I also enjoyed the setup of this in the real world. I think it would be tempting to get Dorothy back to Oz as soon as possible in the movie. And I appreciate that we took our time finding out who she is and what she's dealing with in the real world and building up to getting to Oz. I appreciated that. And honestly, like I hesitated at first about Bellina because I love Toto, but Bellina grew on me so much. I felt like that was like having a companion who speaks is so much fun. Yeah.
Bellina is an MVP. I'm looking for a Bellina.
And she was useful as hell.
I'm just
she was
useful. I'm like, Bellina is MVP. I love Bellina.
Yeah, I really
love
Bellina. And I thought she was going to annoy me, and she did not. I really enjoyed her.
No, she really walks the line so well.
She does. And I really just need to talk about Dorothy in this. It's so strong for me. And this is coming from a hardcore Judy Garland obsessed girl. Fairuza Balk gives such a lovely performance. I really could not take my eyes off of her the entire film. I love that we went with a young Dorothy, like in the books. It makes what she goes through heartbreaking at times and really, really sweet at other times. And I feel like it was very distilled in when they first find TikTok. There was something I just loved about what Dorothy says to Bellina. Bellina says, like, you don't believe that, do you? About like his turning his gears. And she just says, I don't know. We'll wind him up and see. And it's like, I feel like that perfectly captured the simplicity and like open heart and mindedness that feels so Dorothy. That's the Dorothy we love. And I feel like it was captured beautifully. And then like, again, just small examples. Her delivery of I love you so much to the Scarecrow before returning home totally broke my heart. It was so genuine. I almost loved it more than I'll miss you most of all from the original film. And I just love how motivated this Dorothy is by pure love for her friends, the desire to be with her friends again. I just found it very moving. And then the last thing I'll say is every time, we'll talk about this more, like the weaknesses part of it too in some ways, but every time I had this feeling of a character or situation, I was like, that's just a little too dark. It's a little too twisted. I looked it up and it was straight out of one of the Oz books. Yeah. I enjoy that we are not ignoring the rich source material here. I haven't read the whole series, but I know about characters like the Gnome King now because of this. And when it comes to Oz, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to look at it from different perspectives. And I think this movie gets that perfectly.
Yeah, where like even with Princess Mombi is not the character in the Oz books that has the different heads. That's a different
Right.
character altogether.
Yes.
But taking that piece and plugging that in here worked really, really well to the
Mhm.
story that we were telling. So it was working.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the weaknesses here.
Mhm.
There's some frustrating characters here.
Yeah.
Jack Pumpkinhead can be a bit of a frustrating character in that he's just like really annoying.
He's annoying as shit. Yeah, he's annoying.
He isn't the most helpful, and a lot of the time he doesn't really have any grasp as to what is going on.
Him
And
calling her
won't
mom, I can't handle it.
I know, and I won't say this is a bad thing per se, just that it can be grating. And the characterization of him, it serves the function of his character well in that he is supposed to be this like childlike character that Dorothy has to take care of and take
Mm.
charge of. So it makes sense that he's a little helpless because one of the themes that she's like grappling with is motherhood and like that is a societal expectation of her. That's why there's Princess Mombi. That's why he calling her mom. That's why there's the egg situation. But it's still annoying. And then TikTok, God, he moves so damn slow. There's no way that I would believe that they would have been able to successfully get his tin ass up those stairs without Mombi hearing it.
Yeah, I know.
I just have to say it. Like, there's just like a couple things that I'm just like, okay, this is a little frustrating here.
Yes.
And then other weaknesses to the story. Unless you're really paying attention to some of these overarching themes of the story, some of the plot points and the dialogue can seem a bit random. In particular, the egg being the Gnome King's downfall, Jack's insistence on referring to Dorothy as mom.
Mhm.
If you were not really expecting this Oz to be one that is giving life to fear and anxiety, you might not make the connection that one of Dorothy's fears of growing up is around the role of women. From what she's seen, women are either mothers or subservient to men. And when they fail at either one of them, they are of no use. So motherhood was forced onto Aunt Em with the death of Dorothy's parents. Bellina is as good as food if she cannot lay eggs. Without Dr. Worley, Nurse Wilson is just carted off. So if you missed all of that,
Right.
which let's be real, a lot of people might miss that during a first watch just because of the jarring tonal shift of this film from the 1939 film, all of the egg chicken mom story may just feel really random. And it kind of is.
And I had that experience and I wrote down, I'm like, an egg? Are you kidding me? Straight up from the Oz book. So I'm like, you know what though? Let me not say anything.
Yeah, I know. I was watching it and when he just
Like,
keeps
an
calling
egg?
her mom, I was just like, oh, not mom.
Not mom.
No. But
Not
it's a thing. It's a thing. Jack
Yeah.
Pumpkinhead isn't this like completely made up character for this movie. No, Jack Pumpkinhead
He's
exists
in the books with that
in the
name, with
books.
that very simplistic kind of horrible name. It's in the books.
Yes,
Yeah.
and like one of the more horrifying things about him is that his head is like constantly like rotting and decaying. But it's also a fun little thing to note that Jack Pumpkinhead is very likely the inspiration of Jack Skellington for The Nightmare Before Christmas. When you look at their character designs, they're very, very similar in the way that they
Right.
move, the way that they sort of behave. So yeah, like believe me, there's some frustrating shit that's happening here, but I also can't not excuse it because it's part of what these books are.
Yeah,
So-
it's true. Yeah, in that vein, I will say, first of all, I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've watched this movie all the way through. This was on the not allowed to watch list for me as a child, and now I completely understand why, because it messed me up watching it now. I'm not even going to lie to you. It might be because I'm in a very specific place right now, but it put me in a mood. So let's talk about a little bit about that dark weirdness factor of this movie. I'll admit that it's not exactly my cup of tea. But as I said earlier, every time something struck me as overly twisted, it was based on the books. And I think you can still portray some of the weirdness or the darkness of the Oz books in maybe a little bit less of an uncanny valley way. But it is what it is. It's a personal taste thing, but I do think it affected the story in a few ways. Speaking of things that just like didn't quite like hit right for me, it was the Wheelers. Like, yes, they are freaky and they're scary as hell. But first of all, they looked so 1980s to me. Like maybe this is going a little bit into the design. It didn't feel Oz. And the performances were so grating to me of the actors playing however they were directed to act bothered me, and defeating them was weirdly too easy. It was strange. Like things like that too, like even small things like she lands in Munchkinland, like where she landed the first time, but then
there are no houses.
There's nothing, and then she gets to the Emerald City in like 2 minutes.
Yes.
What? Come on. That's the whole point of the story. It takes forever to get to the Emerald City. All right. Princess Mombi in her head, straight out of the books, again, like you said, a different character, was so evil and strange without maybe a little touch more of motivation or character development that would have made her a little bit more interesting. Like she's very terrifying. Like if she chased me, I would probably faint. But she didn't feel, not that she should feel real because it's Oz, but she didn't feel real to me. And then when Dorothy is told that she has the option to never think of Oz again, and she acts like it's the worst thing ever, I just don't quite understand why. I mean, I'm trying to be funny, of course. I know she is here in Oz because she loves her friends. Those are her true friends. But this Oz is so shitty and horrifying. I mean, so is Dorothy's reality in the real world, but like the options are pretty even here. They're comparable at this point. So that's like sits oddly with me.
Well, I think she's probably choosing the Oz of her memory.
True.
She thinks of fondly.
So because of that, I think as an audience, we're missing a bit of what I feel like every Oz story needs in some way, shape, or form, which is our desire as an audience to go to Oz ourselves. There needs to be peril in any adventure, of course, but this Oz is so body snatchy. Like everyone wants to steal parts of Dorothy's body or turn her into an inanimate object. Like there weren't really any like enjoyable Oz moments to break it up, and that was rough for me. Like even like Wicked the book has some really twisted shit that I'm like, I don't want anything to do with that. But then there's things even in that book that I'm like, hey, I want to be there. I want to be up in the attic with Elphaba and Fiyero. All right, I don't know. But again, maybe some of that is personal taste. And then the other thing I'll say is, I wish actually that Ozma had been more of a part of this rather than the ending reveal. Like, I would have been cool if she somehow found out about Ozma from the start and this was all, like, yes, I'm down with her saving her friends, but if this had been a story about her releasing Ozma and we get because, like, seeing Dorothy and Ozma together at the end and, like, seeing them as friends in the real world, I'm super into female friendship in Oz is the thing, baby. And I don't know, something about Ozma, because I think I've actually read parts of Ozma of Oz, the book. I think the whole thing would have felt more, not to be repetitive, Ozian if Ozma had been more a part of the story. Like we're putting back the true queen on the throne of Oz. Like I'm into that story. That's
but it seems like
story.
she was unaware of that mission until she was ready to resolve it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like so mirrors when we start talking about Oz the Great and Powerful, just like the Glinda story of like her father was the king. She's imprisoned by a bad woman and she like, you know, it's interesting. And I feel like there's a lot there. And I wish that it had been more a part of Dorothy's journey and challenge in this movie.
So now let's talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses of the story and characters in Oz the Great and Powerful.
Okay. I actually can't believe how much I have written here for the strengths because I don't like, okay. Anyway. So same thing that I started off with Return to Oz. Generally, the idea for this film, and like we said, how it was sold in this plot summary is solid enough. Exploring the connection between the wizard and the witches of Oz is compelling. Do we do this in Wicked? Yes. But focusing specifically on the wizard's arrival in Oz and his ascension to the throne, I am here for that. I actually, part of me wondered if the fleshing out of this part of the Oz story in the first Wicked movie is inspired by this, with mentions of the prophecy, the magical being on the way to save Oz. Like, it's sort of set up, but, you know, I feel like they grasped onto that because it's interesting. And the fact that Oz is waiting every day for a wizard to come and save them because of this prophecy is a solid choice. It makes it believable that a normal, in this case, a completely lame man, could become the most powerful person in Oz just because everyone really just needs him to be that guy. Glinda says, if you can make them believe, then you're wizard enough. And this is a pretty good explanation of his ability to rise. The people of Oz are just looking for someone to give them hope. I also like that Glinda is partially responsible for his rise to power because it tracks into her basically like forcing Dorothy to believe too in the Wizard of Oz.
Mm-hmm.
In the source material of the Oz books and basically every interpretation thereafter, the story of the wizard is about a man who as Tori from the Oz vlog has said, fails upward. So this isn't as much of a strength as just something I want to acknowledge, that there isn't likely going to be a version of the wizard's origin story in which he isn't a pretty mediocre man, a liar, a narcissist. So there's a challenge built into telling this story and having him be the hero. And one place where I feel like the film tried to prevent him from going full out lying tool bag is necessitating that Oscar fakes his own death in order to defeat Theodora and Evanora. It gives his deception real stakes and motivation, and it's a nice explanation for all of the illusions that he has set up in The Wizard of Oz. This is like just about the best thing I have to say. The seeds of the idea of the plot are the most compelling part of this film. The execution's not there. We'll talk about it. And I guess if I had to call it a character, I do feel like the China girl was so necessary. She finally made me like Oscar a little bit. And I appreciate, again, any opportunity to use some of the settings from the actual Oz book series, the China country in this case. This is dipping into design a little bit. I feel like her CGI was one of the only bits that really worked for me.
Yes.
And Oscar fixing her leg is the only moment in this movie that really made me feel anything.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, the general idea of centering the story around the wizard and the three witches, it works. But that's all. Like, even the idea that the wizard was in love with Dorothy's mother works for me. The thing that we set up, it's juicy. We'll get there, but it goes nowhere. We could have had the reason he is on the run in the first place to be about Annie, who was Dorothy's mother. And that would be such a cool reason why Dorothy is eventually brought to Oz. But we don't do that. So now I'm getting into the rant and into the negativity. So I will stop there.
Okay. I will mirror back those same strengths. I do think that like the concept of this story is so good.
Yeah.
And I think that's why so many people, I think that's why it was a box office success, is because number one, people love Oz and people will show up for Oz. And number two, the story sounds really good. I'm like, this is how the wizard gets here? Absolutely. And I think, yes, you're right when you were like, oh, the mediocrity of the wizard is part of like the conceit of him. And I will push back, though. I don't think that he necessarily has to be a narcissist in order to be mediocre, because I don't think that the wizard in the 1939 film is necessarily a narcissist. He is he's a showman. He's like, but I wouldn't go so far as
I don't think they always are. I think there's a scale of which narcissism is at the end, and some of them hit it.
Yeah. I think he's. I'll get into this I'll get into this when we're talking about the character of Oscar Diggs, because it could have worked so well. It could have worked so well. Okay. But I think the best part of the story are the side characters. Many of our main characters, they feel underdeveloped, so that when we find a few characters that are appropriately developed to their function in the script, they just shine a bit brighter than everyone else. So the China girl, I think Joey King gives a great voice performance. I enjoy the ruthlessness and bravery of such a physically delicate character. And this dichotomy fits very well into the sort of like an Ozian character, because she's a female character that retains her agency, which is in line with the Oz stories. Finley, I think Finley checks the box of the lovable animal sidekick. I think he's cute. He's charming. I like his little bellhop outfit, which is kind of like a nod to the Wizard of Oz flying monkey costumes. Nook, appropriately funny for the size of the role. I love when he beats that Emerald City guard over the head, and that's how they all get into the city for the finale. I think that's funny as hell. I was very entertained, and maybe that's because I was just so dumbed down by that point that I'm just like, yeah, hit
anything,
him.
Please.
And then, honestly, I think the real MVP of the whole ass movie is Master Tinker. I mean, he reads as one of the only characters with an ounce of common sense, and so I think I latched onto him super hardcore because of that. But again, his character is calibrated correctly for the size of the role. Like, we have everything we need from the character to tell this story, and so it just allows Bill Cobbs to just elevate it off the page. And I think out of anyone in this movie I most identify with, it's Bill Cobbs as Master Tinker, just trying to get through the movie. So, I mean, I mean, you can also sort of read that as like a little bit of shade, in that I'm like, yeah, the ones that were scripted to have nothing to do were the ones that like were the best. But then I'll also say The climax of the story is very satisfying for me in terms of being a prequel story. There are a lot of outstanding questions from The Wizard of Oz that it gives some very strong answers to. Oz being a giant projected smoke head, why the witches do not defy Oz, how was Oz able to convince the people of the Emerald City of his wizardry? Are there any people who know about the man behind the curtain? We get answers to these questions, and I like that. And I think this scene plays out pretty well overall. It gives us a satisfying turn of the story. And I don't know what it says about me, but I'm always going to be a sucker for people using non-magic and or modern technology to defeat ancient magic or otherwise villainous characters. It's like a trope that I just really love. It's like, it's the conceit of Hocus Pocus. It's why Hocus Pocus is so good.
Mm-hmm.
So like watching Rachel Weisz in all of her seriousness just lose it over a projection and some fireworks, it just tickles me in all the right places. So the climax is very, like, watching her
That's hilarious.
just so seriously be like, he is a wizard. And it's just the most, it's very funny to me.
Oh my God.
She's
absolutely.
She's giving it her all.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, and the projection is like not even like a very good projection. It's just like, and she's like, oh my God. That's just so funny to me.
I know.
Let's talk weaknesses though.
All right, here we go. Okay. I truly don't really know where to begin here. It's funny. When I saw this, we talked about it because we knew each other at this point when this movie came out.
We did. This was
and I
second
remember
year.
being like, yes. And I remember afterwards being like, oh, I was like disappointed in that. And I had this feeling when I had this thought when I was going to watch it again. And I'm like, watch me really like this now. I had the opposite of that experience. I'm going to focus on a few specific things that I feel like could have been like tent poles to hold this film up, but instead have just allowed it to sag. I feel like basically every main character in this film is weakly drawn and developed. And I'm going to focus mostly on Oscar and Theodora because they offend me the most. So, like, it's clear, it's obvious. Oscar this guy straight up sucks. Like, not in, like, an enjoyable character way, just, like, in the watching it as an audience way. As I mentioned earlier, there is some challenge built into telling the story of the future wizard because he's gonna be flawed. I understand why this film was looking first to cast Robert Downey Jr., and then they tried for Johnny Depp because they are both very good at creating lovable rogues. As a performer, listen, I every time me and Conor do a showdown, I'm like, we're not discussing performances. I avoid discussing performances whenever I can avoid it because I can't stand armchair critics, and I believe most people think they could do better until they're put in the position to do it, and then they can't. But that being said, James Franco made $7 million playing Oscar.
That's not a $7 million performance.
No, it feels like he is laughing at himself acting the role as he's acting it. In the moments when Oscar is consciously being his phony performance-y self, it feels like Franco is refusing to fully go for it. And this starts in the real-world scenes at the top of the film, so getting invested in the story is a major struggle. So when Oscar is getting blown to Oz, I have absolutely nothing to hold on to in terms of investment in his story, except maybe the hope that his arrival in Oz will humble him, which it doesn't. And we'll really dive into this in a moment, so buckle your seatbelts, but I absolutely cannot understand why women would throw themselves at this man. His poor choices, greed, and lack of any skills are not even covered up by charm and game. The best line he's got with Theodora is telling her he's afraid something might happen to her, and she's like basically left breathless, and I truly do not understand. Like, can we please give this man some game? Because again, at least that's a movie that's saying something, that a mediocre white man can fail up if he's charming and desirable, which this Oscar is not. This then makes every other character out to be a fool. The witches who throw themselves at him, rant incoming on that. Finley the monkey crying over the supposed death of a man who only deceived and used him. It just makes the entire movie fall flat. And even though the characters do call him out for being the worst at different times, it's never enough to make them feel like they actually see through him fully. And then to make matters worse, we get randomly thrown in lines from Oscar like, nothing's impossible if you put your mind to it. Like trying to build out a redemption arc for him that just like literally isn't there. His whole decision to actually defend the Quadlings, Tinkers, and Munchkins is born out of his dream to be like Thomas Edison and to use trickery to bring them, an illusion to bring them to a victory. Again, an interesting concept. Can we as an audience love a guy who enjoys lies and tricks but uses them for good? I think so. But instead, this idea is confused by suddenly trying to make Oscar a good man. I truly don't know who he is. So then Theodora. Listen, any film, play, book, anything attempting to create a backstory for the Wicked Witch of the West after Wicked is gonna fail in comparison. It's just gonna. But you gotta try. That being said, Theodora is painfully poorly developed in a way that actually makes me angry. Because the Wicked Witch of the West is a juicy character any way you slice it, and this is what you gave her as an origin story. The Theodora we know before she turns green, let's start with that. I actually think setting her up to be exceptionally naive, trusting, and lovesick is establishing a fall from grace that's so unbelievable that it's not fun anymore.
I mean, like Maleficent does it, but Maleficent does it better, like the movie Maleficent.
Because her trusting personage is realistic.
Exactly.
This Theodora is not a real person.
They didn't do it with Theodora. Yeah.
No. Like, at one point, she hops down the yellow brick road, and I was just like, what the hell is going on?
I know.
And then
in a sick-ass costume, though.
Oh, I hate that costume.
Oh, I love the hat.
The hat. She also acted like she had never seen the Emerald City before. It was just nothing was making sense to me.
Yeah, didn't she come
She just
from
had
there?
this, you're like, what? Your sister is, okay. She is just an amalgamation of bizarre, random character and performance choices that make her feel like a child. And even under a spell, I have a hard time believing that she becomes the Wicked Witch of the West in such a short amount of time. Her magic is also an inconsistent issue, but we'll get to that in a bit. Theodora as the Wicked Witch is just not delicious. Her dialogue is rough as hell. For example, I'm going to wipe out your light until all that's left is my darkness. And her sudden personality change just isn't believable. Glinda, so naive, says the woman who was hopping down the yellow brick road a couple of days ago. She also completely admits to the fact that Evanora killed Glinda's father, so this isn't even a crafty and deceptive witch. That doesn't feel scary to me.
I'll also say some of her dialogue where she's like, so was I once. I'm like, you mean like 2 days ago?
It's 2 days
I'm like, that was
ago.
like yesterday.
Yeah.
Once? I'm like, what do you mean once? Ugh.
Woofity whoop. I also think that Theodora's story would be much more compelling if something Oscar directly did turned her green and put the spell on her rather than Evanora. Her having an even more direct vendetta against him would heighten the stakes rather than her just being generally angry that he doesn't love only her. This would also be a fun little thing for us to think about when we revisit The Wizard of Oz. Why the wizard wants the witch dead. Maybe because he actually harmed her and he knows it and he wants to silence her. That's interesting. That would make Theodora more sympathetic, and I think this film could definitely do with a little bit more nuance in terms of her character as well. Then there are the little wicked nods, I defy you, run out of bubbles, hearts shrinking and withering away, that don't feel fun because of the way that women are portrayed in this movie. You do not get to riff on the story of two powerful women in this film, so let's get into it. Let's start by being clear. The Wizard of Oz is a feminist book series.
Yes.
L. Frank Baum was highly influenced by his mother-in-law, Matilda Jocelyn Gage, a radical, this woman was the frickin' best, radical intersectional feminist. She co-founded the National Women's Suffrage Association. She co-authored the history of women's suffrage, and she even wrote a manifesto on the history of witch hunts. She was so much more radical than even her contemporaries and specifically focused on the way the stigma of witches and witchcraft were used to oppress women and how the title of witch was applied to any wise, learned woman. Please look her up. She's effing amazing. But anyway, the Witches of Oz are inspired by her. In the books, the film, and of course Wicked, they are powerful, intelligent, and interested in things that have nothing to do with men. So the way this movie portrays women, specifically the witches, is especially egregious. So we have the lovesick Theodora who says things like, "Here I thought I'd live a lonely life," immediately upon meeting Oscar. I don't have a problem with love at first sight. We know this. But the way Theodora experiences it, she has no original thoughts or desires of her own that don't have to do with him anymore. Tell me one thing about her that doesn't have to do either with Oscar or her relationship with her sister. I can't name anything. It would also maybe be okay if she was the only lovesick woman, but Glinda, Evanora, and Annie, for that matter, are all attracted to Oscar, and that attraction becomes the main point of their stories. Even Glinda, whose main aim is for sure to protect and rescue the people of Oz, is caught up as Oscar's final love interest. Glinda has real magic. She is in the bloodline of Ozian royalty. Why wouldn't she lead the people of Oz against Evanora and Theodora herself? This story makes her out to believe that a skillless liar is a better bet for Oz than her perfectly magical and capable self. That's lame. She spends all of her time convincing Oscar not to be a total fuck. It's sickening. And then she's reduced to a foot pop kiss at the end of the movie. Goodbye. As soon as we meet all three of these witches, they are just spewing exposition. Even the most strong-willed of the three, Evanora, doesn't have any defining characteristics aside from being generally power-hungry. She sicks Theodora on Oscar by amplifying her anger towards him when she's capable of taking him down herself, and she has the real motivation to do it. This and the fact that these women are constantly commenting on each other's appearances are just two examples of the diminishment of these witches' spines, interests, and power via infighting. Sorry, I have two more things.
Oh my God. This has turned into a whole rant.
I'm so sorry.
I love it.
This then leads to even more confused dialogue choices, like Evanora. Actually, you were talking about this. This is what's funny. Rachel Weisz giving her absolute all. She has tears in her eyes. And she goes, more tricks after everything. While on the verge of tears, and this is when she sees Oscar after taking Glinda captive. But what does this line mean, really? What does it mean? And what does it have to do with her viewpoint on Oscar? I know this seems nitpicky, but when you really actually listen in and track the dialogue in this movie, rather than kind of just letting it wash over you, a lot of the dialogue is so generic that it's rendered meaningless.
Yeah. Because also, like, the whole thing of, like, the music box and everything and the flirt, like, she's flirting with him as a way to use his power and influence of just, like, being the potential wizard. She doesn't care about him, and he's not attracted to her, really. And so it's like she doesn't have any sort of emotional connection to him to be like more tricks, like you've tricked me in the past. Like, no, he hasn't tricked her.
No, he didn't. You saw through him the whole time.
Yeah, he didn't really do anything.
So yeah, we had to involve like fake romance in her storyline when we could have just avoided it. Weird.
Yeah.
Michelle Williams, in another role of the woman who loves a circus man who can't love her back the way he should, a la The Greatest Showman.
Ooh.
And Rachel Weisz are supremely talented actors, and seeing them have to make something out of these 2D women makes me really mad. Not to mention that the film pays homage to the concept of people from the real world translating to people in Oz, as is an Ozian thing. But, like, why? What was the point of the Annie character?
Yeah.
What does it add to the film or Oscar story? Because it led nowhere. It led nowhere.
It's just a way for him to get the quote-unquote girl that he wants, but
right, but in
superimpose that onto a completely different person.
But why did we also, like, again, it's a choice to make that Dorothy's mom, but you have to have a why, and you have to have it pay off. It doesn't pay off, ever.
No.
I'm going to wrap this up. I'm so sorry. Humor for me wasn't hitting it at all. The stakes are high in this film, but it being a fantasy film about a man who really likes tricks and magic, I can see room for humor. But it should be situational and its own specific brand of humor, and this film stoops to the lowest level of jokes ever. Like, pointless jokes, like stereotyping that monkeys like bananas and Finley getting mad about that. Oscar constantly calling Glinda Wanda counting as a joke. Like, I can't. And honestly, I was very bothered by, like, Nuck and the humor around Nuck. Whatever, we're going to keep moving. And then finally, a quick wrap up, the rules and the magic of this Oz. Basically, it feels like there aren't any rules or systems of magic that are established. I'll put Ozian creatures in this category as well. From what I could find, there aren't river fairies in Ozian book lore.
No.
So why did we invent them for this movie? Not only do the books have so much world building to use, but what this movie decided to invent isn't even good. They're not visually appealing or funny or menacing, LOL. So why feature this as the first creature that we see in Oz? And then finally, the magic of the witches. I'm confused. So, and you know what? It might have been me just missing this because it's not laid out well. So basically, each of them is only powerful because of the stones in their possession rather than any real natural abilities. But that's not even true. Like, number one, I feel like this is another thing that undermines the power of the women in this movie and just feels like a choice made so that Evanora could most easily be turned into a hag at the end of the film. But it isn't entirely true because we know that Theodora can do magical things when she gets upset, even before becoming the Wicked Witch of the West. So she shoots her little fireball when she's upset, and that's it. But then suddenly she's the Wicked Witch in possession of all this relatively generic green magic. Like, sure, the enchanted apple could have given her these enhanced powers, but again, why and how? Did Evanora enchant it? Did she get it from someone else? Just the lack of specificity makes the magic in Oz, of all places, feel insignificant.
Theodora has the red ring, though.
Yeah. So it only comes from that? That's it?
I'm wondering if and I mean, this isn't good because I'm having to speculate as to, but I'm wondering if it's almost like it's in Dungeons and Dragons, it's like an arcanic focus. Like it's almost like it's a focus stone or something like that.
Yeah.
But again, we don't know because they're not.
Yeah, just make that choice.
They're not
sure,
saying
make that
anything
choice.
about it.
I could get down with it if you let me know that that's what you're deciding to do. Like, what?
And also the fact that like we don't know that those stones are significant because the only thing that we've been clued in on is to like break Glinda's wand.
Yes.
When it's like, it's not really about breaking the wand. It's making sure that that stone in the wand gets broken. Like that's the, but we
Do you want to stop
know
her from getting that stone or not?
Exactly. No, I concur on all of these. And you know what? The Nook humor, I think it just got me because
I don't want to take that from you.
brain dead.
I do not want to take that from you.
No, listen, like I was not laughing at most of his stuff, but by the time we got to the end and he's just like beating that dude over the head, I'm like, wait, that's how they're getting into the they got into the Emerald City completely by chance, that this dude is just like beating this dude over the head and like he accepts it.
We very conveniently just like had, what was it, like the Emerald City Underground? Oh yeah, they exist, by the way.
Oh yeah, they just were there. Yeah.
They were there.
So I'll kind of go into some of my weaknesses. I actually have like a few things that you don't have on here, so we'll just
give it
pile
to me,
them
baby.
on.
Let's go.
I do want to talk about Oscar Diggs for a second because there is just so much potential in this character. This could be just such an incredible character, but there's nothing really redeemable about this character as it stands. Too often he is choosing the most overtly underhanded, lying, cheating, scumbag way to do something. And for that to be our main character who we are supposed to be rooting for, it just doesn't work. Glinda says to Oscar that he has a good heart, but we have literally only seen one example of this up until that point, and that's when he takes the time to glue the China girl's legs back.
Yup.
We needed at least one more example of him being a genuinely good person who just gets wrapped up in the showmanship or the act of being a magician. But up until now, we have seen him prey on women, treat Frank and Finley the monkey like absolute shit, and then try to manipulate every situation so that he benefits. His selfishness far outweighs his altruism, and that just does not work if we're to believe that Oscar has a good heart, even if he's a fraud, and that this Oscar is to become the wizard that we see at the end of the 1939 film. We should not have had him making out with Mila Kunis.
Oh my God.
We should have seen him being flirty and charming to her in the way that any performer might do something to like play it up for an audience. And then Theodora misunderstand what was actually happening if we're going that route anyway. But instead, he's legit romancing her just to use her. So then we're all on the side of Theodora because she's really justified for going after this scumbag douche canoe of a man. He played her on purpose for money and power, and that's not a good person. But this character is so fixable by adding in more instances where he has a good heart, but he just gets like swept away by the moment, or he says too much, or he promises too much. If we see this in his character back in the real world before he gets there, that could be it. Like to see that man who's like, yes, I want to give you everything. And then he can't come through. That's the essence of who the wizard is. And that's certainly how he can get to where he gets in this story. Too many scenes. This is another weakness. Too many scenes that just feel like they're being lived in just to show some sort of CGI effect or evoke or manipulate a feeling, as opposed to moving the plot forward. The amount of time we spend with James Franco screaming as the balloon crashes, the number of precious cinematic seconds wasted across multiple scenes of flowers opening up or random-ass water fairies that are attempting to whistle Pop Goes the Weasel with Oscar for no reason at all, it's bad. if we had removed a lot of this waste, there definitely would have been enough time to chart an actually redeemable character for Oscar who does good things. Another thing, the flying monkeys versus flying baboons distinction. Is that in the books?
Not
I
as
don't
far as
think
I
so.
know. No.
We should have just made Finley a different type of animal.
I completely agree.
He clearly doesn't need to be a flying monkey. So we should just let the flying primates be evil, because I'm sitting here trying to figure out the distinction and like why one set of them can talk and one can't. And it just doesn't make any sense. And so the more I sit here and ponder it, the more I'm just convinced that folks just didn't really think that deeply about it. And if this is supposed to be a prequel that is setting up the events of The Wizard of Oz, it doesn't really support the goal to do this and then not explain it.
Yes.
And then last thing I'll say, the real world Oz parallels, it's very similar to The Wizard of Oz. You know, it's the allies, which is fine, but the whole conceit of Oz is that it reflects back the traveler's psyche, turning their real world problems into heightened fantasy elements. And this version of Oz doesn't really do that. Oscar's problems back in the real world are that he's a cheat and a con artist and struggling to get by on the midway. But there isn't really some major theme that the character is grappling with. The biggest theme of the story is probably the question of greatness or goodness. And yes, we do hear Oscar talking about his desire for greatness before he gets to the Land of Oz, but I would not say that the question is properly posed as greatness versus goodness. He's just kind of generally being a dick to everyone while wanting this idea of greatness. But he's not having some sort of internal struggle about it. It's just like a goal. We see Dorothy dealing with struggles of being overlooked, a loss of the sense of home, of trauma, of trying to hold on to childhood. And so Oz takes those problems and makes them real. Oscar, at least the way he's portrayed in this film, doesn't have remorse for his bad behavior until after he gets to Oz. It makes the story come up short in comparison to the other Oz stories that are actively trying to answer questions that are being posed in the real world. It's just like a complete departure, just like one of the foundational things of Oz. It's the hero's journey. You go away and then you return, and like, yes, the wizard's arc is not completed until he returns back to the real world at the end of The Wizard of Oz. But like, again, having the Annie being Dorothy's mother, there could have been some sort of significance in
juicy.
him returning her home. Like
Right.
that he, and like there could have been something there if we were going there.
Exactly.
We could have recharacterized it. And then again, with the Wicked Witch's broomstick, we could have had some sort of plot element of like she took something from him that will allow him to get back that is in
Right.
her broomstick. And like,
Yeah.
it's right there, people. Like, it's right there. Oh my
I
God.
know. And the crazy thing is, all of these things we've described don't really even touch on the whole issue that we won't even get into now, just like the general uneven tone of this movie. Like, we
It's
can't even get
wacky,
into
man.
that. It's
No.
wacky.
All right. So now let's hop back to Return to Oz and let's talk about some of the design aspects. Let's start with the strengths. One of the things that I'll say is a strength is the sort of sparse, not necessarily sparse, but conscious use of CG. We're not using CGI to create the world of Oz from the ground up. Instead, we are using it to accentuate things that are already real. Now, part of this is due to the limitations of where CG effects were at the time, but ultimately the places they decided to use it only benefits the film, in my opinion, and to how well it holds up. Much like how painted backdrops were used in the sound stages for the 1939 The Wizard of Oz, the CG effects are used in the same way, selling the expansion of the world, not the world itself. Fun fact, this is something that Wicked does as well, and is why it's going to hold up so well. Everyone's like, oh my God, but they say that they built everything, but I see blue screens. I'm like, the blue screens are just for like windows. They're just for I'm like, the things that the actors are interacting with, those are all real. That's where it counts. One of the best uses of CG in this film, I think, is in the stone. The stone faces and the stone entrance to the trinket room in the Gnome King's palace.
Oh my God, so good.
Yeah, they're using a lot of composite CG with practical sets, and it really sells the effects. The shifting artistic stone faces on the real stone walls are achieved not by trying to render stone, but rather render cracks on a real set piece. And so, by using this combination of real and computer generated images, they're able to really sell off the effect as something that exists with the actors, even though only a part of it is actually tangible. And leaning into the limitations of the animations, the sort of like jerky movements of animation, I think it really works in this film's favor. Instead of trying to create this ultra smooth, magical effect,
Yes.
they embrace the imperfections of the animation to portray this sort of syncopated and staccato movement of stone. Another thing that I think is really succeeding, practical effects. We're using lots of practical effects here. When trying to make a fantasy land feel real, it's imperative that the actors on camera are interacting with as much in real time and space as possible. It allows the actor to buy into the given circumstances of the world that you're creating and experience real moments. And if they buy in, then we buy in. So, costuming and makeup. I'm going to talk about the Wheelers here for a second in the strengths. And it's not necessarily like the quality of their costumes, but more the function of them. Having these actors wheeling around on 2 and 4 wheels really allows them, I think, to feel threatening to Dorothy and us in the audience. By knowing that they are actors, we automatically put certain constraints on what they can and cannot do in a physical space. But then when we see them subvert and defy these limitations in their speed, their physicality, and their ability to maneuver a set that we think we understand, they're starting to break those preconceptions. The act of setting limitations that are then immediately broken creates an illusion of pluripotentiality for the audience, that anything is possible. And when you do that, it creates fear and tension when we realize something is real and we don't know how it is going to behave. The decision to costume them with masks as helmets, so when they're moving on all fours, they feel like one creature, and then when they stop and stand up to reveal the humanoid selves, they're something else. That creates even more uncertainty. We're
Oh
like,
yeah,
what
it's weird
exactly
as all
is
hell.
this
It is
character?
so
Yeah.
weird.
Again, just when we think we know what these characters are, they change into something else. And I think that's working really, really well. These Wheelers are supposed to be unsettling, and their costumes really support that. Princess Mombi's heads. These are all real actors' heads
They're
in the
good.
cabinets, and it sells a level of believability because they're all real. They're not trying to battle this uncanny valley effect of overcompensating to make each head have a level of independence or uniqueness like a live actor would give. They're all live actors. They're all real and they're all different, which makes the scene when they begin to scream so
Oh
horrifying
my God.
because they're all sleeping and then screaming in different, unique ways. They each have a specific voice, and it just makes it all feel real because it is. I
And
love
when
that
they
scene.
get, I do too. And I was waiting for a moment when they get picked up for it to look a little off, and it just didn't.
No,
They
it
looked
looks really
fantastic,
well.
picked up out of the shelf as well. So
because they're
kudos.
also like they're doing smart camera setups of like how we see the
Yes.
heads when they go away. They're doing all these cheats where we are filling in with our imaginations, and so it works better. It's smart. And then one of my favorite costuming and like makeup things is the Gnome King evolution.
Yeah, it's
This
cool.
is so good. So as more of Dorothy's friends are turned into trinkets and Oz is forgotten, the Gnome King becomes more real. He starts as a CGI rock face and then slowly comes to life through prosthetics, hair, and makeup. And the shifts between each state of the process are subtle and they're executed so well. The coloring, the texture of skin, even the lack of details in hair from being carved to then actual stone colored hair by the time TikTok is turned into a trinket, where it's like, it's actually hair. It's just colored the same color of stone. I don't know. That transformation is like masterfully done. It's just every increment is just so subtle and it works really well. Another practical effect that I think is really great, puppetry. When in doubt, puppets are the answer. There really is no substitute for an actor being able to interact with an actual character. because then the actor doesn't have to work so hard to trick themselves into an illusion. It's why it was imperative for the droids and Yoda in Star Wars, for Audrey 2 in Little Shop of Horrors, and the T-Rex in Jurassic Park to all be real. And so we see this in Bellina. So in addition to using over 40 real chickens for the film that each were adept at a particular task.
Oh, I read that. Freaking incredible.
They also used a mechanical puppet chicken for some of the scenes with Bellina. And I think Bellina looks great in this film. And the alternating use of the mechanical and real chickens creates this fantastic illusion of not really ever being able to tell when the chicken is real and when the chicken isn't. And then the Gump. This is just such an interesting character because he is simultaneously just the mounted head of the Gump and then also all of his composite furniture parts.
Oh my
The
God.
magic really comes through when we see all of these disparate parts come together and moving together, not just on their own. And it's just all like practical puppetry, mechanical effects. And then the last thing I'll call out here are the sets. We have many real sets here, not blue or green screens, but actual tangible scenery to interact with and play with. And not only does this help sell the illusion of reality for a fantasy world, but it also creates room for more artistic choices to be made by the director and the cinematographer. When you have a physical set, you might find that there are some very interesting unplanned moments that you can capture or shots that you can line up. Without a physical set, we wouldn't have the shot through the keyhole between Dorothy and the Wheelers, or all of the fun reflections off the mirrors of Princess Mombi's throne room in the Emerald City. And some of my personal favorite sets are the ruins of the Emerald City and the Garden of Statues. There are just like so many nooks and crannies and dead ends and stairs. The statues of the citizens are just like so interesting and evocative. And then the Emerald City Palace is another one of my favorites. The mirrors, the geometric patterning paired with gold, silver, and light is in just such a stark contrast to the rest of the city. And I think this palace feels like a solid reimagining of the Emerald City with some bold artistic choices being made. Yes, all of the emeralds have been taken by the Gnome King, but it also follows the description of the city in the books, which uses a lot of gold and other jewels because the wizard then requires everyone to wear green colored glasses in the city so that everything is green. And so I really enjoyed that we got to see someone like do that.
I pretty much agree with all of that. I mean, I'll say, I think there's that challenge of there's a lot of very specific things from the Wizard of Oz film that are copyrighted, like visuals that are sort of owned by them. So again, yeah, you have to find that workaround of like, what's our version of this going to be while still feeling Ozian. So that's like a big challenge. And going back to the beginning of the movie, I don't know why I enjoyed it so much, but I really loved the real accurate turn of the century Kansas feel, almost turn of the century. Because I feel like sometimes movies from the 80s doing period settings still feel like it's the 80s to me. And this felt very like drab and scary and depressing. And again, I just really liked that setup before we get to Oz. That was nice. And I totally agree. The shots that we are able to achieve because of the physical and practical settings around the actors, like there's one where like Dorothy opens a mirror door and there's like an angel statue reflected in it. Just like some very interesting and beautiful shots.
When she's opening that one thing where the cabinet is with like the real head and the life potion, and the angle of the physical set with the mirror allows us to see Mombi sleeping at the same time.
Oh my God, yes, chilling, scary as
so
hell.
good.
Yeah. Yes, there were some just really, really beautiful shots in this. And I couldn't agree more. I'm absolutely obsessed with everything they did with the stone and the rock and the face, and love it. Love it. And it holds up so well over time. It doesn't look like it's from the 80s at all. Like I really have to say, I have a weird, I don't know what it is. I have a weird aversion to some 80s and 70s movies that just give me the ick and I cannot explain it. And I expected this movie to do that. And the effects are so good that I did not get that feeling at all. It really
some of the like
fresh.
cheesy effects that probably give you the ick of like 70s and 80s movies where it's like such very clearly 80s style on something that's fantasy or something like
Yes.
that is comforting to me. I don't know
Oh
why.
my God.
I just
No,
love it.
I know so many people who say the same thing. And maybe it's because like I didn't really grow up on I don't know what it is. It's so funny.
Like the people who have like imagined Game of Thrones as like an 80s dark fantasy
I
that I
cannot
love
stand
that
those.
stuff.
When they do those, like
it.
like I saw one that was like Sleeping Beauty in that era, and I was like, get it away from me. Get it away from me.
Oh
I
my
hate
God.
it. It's so funny. So I loved, for me, it's a personal taste thing, but I just didn't get, this is a very like timeless looking film, and I appreciated that so much. And a small thing, just another small thing, they paid to be able to use the ruby slippers in this. That's one of those things that's copyrighted. Like, Wicked has the silver shoes because they're not going to pay up. And I actually think it's such a small thing that was so worthwhile.
Yeah, I agree.
It's so iconic. And because this Dorothy is so different from Judy Garland's Dorothy, we didn't get to see this Dorothy experience the original Oz story. Having something that really feels like it's from that one connects these in a way that, because this takes that darker perspective, can be lost. So something as key as the slippers being the same was really nice for me.
Also, I just got very tickled by seeing the Gnome King wearing the
He
ruby
looked like
slippers.
an absolute queen.
I was
absolute
like,
queen.
oh my gosh.
He was like kicking his toes underneath like the little skirt.
It was so good. I loved it.
It was so good.
As far as weaknesses go, some of the costumes, the hair, the green screen effects can look a little bit dated. I mean, it's a film made in the 80s.
And M's hair looks like it's from the 80s. Like,
yes. I think so much of it still holds up really well, but there are definitely some moments that feel older, especially, I mean, and I love it, the hairstyles of all of Princess Mombi's heads, which just like feels some of those like quintessential 80s fantasy stylings. Yeah. It's so comforting.
Which gave me the ick.
It's so comforting to me, but I'm putting that in here as a weakness because it's like, yeah, it dates it.
Yeah. I think, and a lot of her allies, her friends in this, look very inspired by the W.W. Denslow drawings from the book. So all good. It's just, again, a personal taste thing. I think the MGM versions of these characters being a little bit more humanoid allowed me to connect emotionally to them. The Scarecrow's a little freaking creepy in this. He looks like the illustration.
But he looks like the illustration, yeah.
Yeah. So
and
it's
then
a personal
Tin Man
taste thing.
even looks like the illustration.
Yes, very much. So I don't know. I just wish the uncanny factor could have been toned down a little. Like maybe his mouth could have moved more. Like, like make him a little bit less uncanny valley, but whatever. And then the only other thing that I'll say, again, I think this is tied to like the ick factor and like the thing that feels good to you and bad to me.
I love dark fantasy so much.
I know. Which is especially the room where the trinkets are.
Yes.
I don't like it.
You don't like that room?
And I don't really like Mombi's Palace either. I forget if it was the trinket room or Mombi's Palace, but my husband came in at one point and was looking at it, and I'm like, I was like, does this look like Oz to you? And he goes, this looks like a 72nd Street apartment. And I was like, absolutely it does.
Oh, I'm wondering if that might have been the like storage closet up in the tower of Mombi's.
That does for sure too.
Because it also has all the like palm fronds and everything.
Yes,
too.
what? I don't like it. I don't like
the
it.
palms. The palms are a part of they're a part of the Gump, even in the book.
This is what I'm saying. This is what I have to keep calling about this film is everything that I don't really like and like has a solid source material.
I know,
like it's personal taste.
Their production designer, they had the books here and they were like, well, it says here that it needs to be a palm frond. So,
but yeah, some of these settings just for me, it's not what I like. It's not what I like. But it's all right.
Okay, I'll take it. All right, let's do Oz the Great and Powerful. Let's talk about the design here.
Okay.
Let's start with the strengths.
Okay, strengths. I only have two. The first is the opening credits of this movie are fire aesthetically. They promised this like whimsical, dark, romantic, richly period film. We don't get delivered any of that. But if the aesthetic of the title had carried over into the movie, we really could have been cooking with gas.
Though they do give away the reveal.
They do.
Of Theodora
they also just
in
give.
That.
Like I said, the aesthetic, not the content. The aesthetic. Only.
I was like, wait, why are you doing that?
Oh, she's the witch. Okay. And, I don't know, just to say something, and we'll talk about it in a moment, so many of the nods to the Wizard of Oz were way too heavy-handed for me, and I guess this one is too, but the full screen to widescreen, like, formatting change when we go into Oz, I liked it. It was
Yeah.
good for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are some CG special effects that I like.
Wow.
The explosions at the end, I think they look good. Those like big
you like that
fireballs.
climax. You like that
I
ending
do.
scene. You
Those
liked
big
it.
fireball explosions that happen when they turn on the Oz projection fog, like it's a nod to the 1939 film and the style of it, with the sort of like the sound of it is feels very reminiscent to those like big explosions from the 1939 film, and I liked it. The iridescent fog, I just think it looks pretty cool. Like, I'm not gonna lie. I
love you.
I like that the light and iridescence that accompanies Bubbles finds its way into all of Glinda's magic. She has like a very clear white iridescent bubble vapor element to her magic in the way that Theodora has red fire elemental magic and Evanora has green lightning elemental magic. The clarity of that, you know, it made it easier to track whose magic was doing what in battles and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, that's an Evanora. Oh, that's a Theodora. Like, I could track it. It was nice.
I love it.
And then the China Girl character design and animation, I think this is the best CGI.
Oh,
in the
yes.
whole film.
Amen.
The team that worked on the China Girl did an excellent job. And I think that's because they didn't have to create something that felt photorealistic. She's a living art piece, so they could take a lot of stylistic and artistic liberty in her design and creating rules for how she would move. There is also a puppet team on set for her as well. I think this is actually one of the only times in this movie that it felt like everyone was on the same page and working towards a common goal. And that's it.
Okay.
All right. Hit us with our weaknesses here.
Okay.
I know you have some things to say.
I do. So obviously CGI, the CGI in this film for me is it's hard to look at. A few moments that stand out as especially bad, like you already called out because it just also went on too long. The cyclone.
Yeah.
Oh my God. At first I thought they were supposed to look cartoonish and bad on purpose, but they weren't.
No.
There's that. The large flowers along the river when Oscar first arrives in Oz don't even look like they're in the same plane of existence as him. This shot specifically is when I first saw the CGI green screen lines around James Franco. And overall, I never feel like he's actually inside any of the Ozian outdoor landscapes. Listen, I know it was 2013, but the fact that this movie was applauded in some reviews for the visuals is still super odd to me. What? Honestly, Finley the monkey is not great for me. I don't actually like him as a character anyway, but whatever. But especially when we meet him and he's entangled in the most unrealistic looking vines ever. It's just, it's bad. And then at one point to me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't think I am, even the fence posts along the yellow brick road look CGI'd. Why? Why couldn't we put some practical fence posts along? Why?
Everything is so CGI that I'm like, I don't believe that anything is real.
No, absolutely not. And if that's what we were going for, great. They did it.
I don't think James Franco's real.
He's definitely not real. And just this overall Oz look. Like, I acknowledge this, again, maybe a bit more personal taste. But the first looks at this land gave me way more Wonderland and Seuss vibes than Oz.
I have Seuss vibes as well.
It looks like Seuss. It's Seussian. And like, I don't necessarily think that every version of Oz should look and feel exactly the same. And like I said, it's kind of an unavoidable issue that any Oz-related piece is going to face this problem of copyrighted looks of things. So I acknowledge there's a challenge here.
But why do we have Mount Crumpet?
I don't know.
Crumpet there?
I don't know.
Mount Crumpet is legitimate. When we go into the wide shot and it's like snowing, he's legit looking at Mount Crumpet.
Listen, we talked about Candyland last time. This is what Candyland should look like, okay?
Literally, this is
Where's
Candyland.
The Gumdrop Forest?
Where is the molasses mud pie thing? Where is Queen Frostine?
Oh my God.
It's bad.
Not Mount Crumpet. Oh my God. The oversaturated colors of this Oz actually don't do anything for me. So that one's for all the people who said that Wicked was too desaturated. Because I don't find this overly rich color to draw me in. I honestly don't have the desire.
It makes it feel more fake.
Yes. And I don't have the desire to be inside a single one of the settings from this film. And I think that for a fantasy and an Oz fantasy at that, like I said, I think one of the requirements is we need to want to be there in some way, shape, or form. I think it's a huge issue. And that's half the fun of these things anyway. I also think some of the strange cinematography decisions might be playing into this feeling. Like,
Yup.
there's some weird camera swoops. And I remember this one specific shot of like James Franco's gigantic head overlaid over some action. And it just took me right out of the movie. Okay, the costumes. I was kind of horrified to learn that Gary Jones, the Princess Diaries costume designer, is one of the costume designers of this film. Because these costumes portray all of the women in this cast through the male gaze. Everyone's boobs are shoved up.
Oh.
The good girl is in white, the bad girl's in black. And listen, that's like, I know that's a Wizard of Oz wicked thing too, but it can be done with a gentler hand. The boobs were making me crazy. I remember being into Glinda's costumes and tiara the first time I saw this movie. But then, wow, a closer look
You gave me that tiara for Christmas.
I know. A closer look at them exposes what looks like pretty cheap construction. Like, I see the individual sequins on top of this very, like, bad-looking faux lace. I see wrinkles. If nothing else, Ozzy costumes need to be it. She was wrinkled. You can't do that to Michelle Williams. Ozzy costumes need to be it. And these just, like, didn't really dazzle me. I'm sorry, but Theodora's looks are very confusing to me. Her first pants outfit with the gigantic hat, I can't get on board with it.
I love the hat. I want that hat. That's like a Kentucky Derby hat.
It is, yes.
That's an off to the races, like My Fair Lady.
Eliza Doolittle.
Yes.
And listen, I think there's room for me not really getting the style if that style is very specifically Ozian. But we haven't established an Ozian vocabulary in the costumes. The outfit doesn't feel fun or fantastical to me. And then, did I see what I think I saw? Does she basically push the head portion of that hat inside out to make the pointy witch hat? What is that?
That is, I think, my single least. I have that. That is my single least favorite effect. Because not only is the silhouette, the shadow silhouette, just complete CGI and bad CGI of that as well. But then also she takes her red, beautiful hat and then just somehow flips it inside out and forces it. And it becomes this pointy black, again, CGI hat. It's such a bad moment. That whole scene, because it's just like the pearls are going everywhere. It's titties for days.
Titties for days. Thank you. I'm just saying.
It's bad dialogue. It's weird camera shit. It's so a Snow White apple moment.
No, okay. Yes. Like what?
It's too many things.
Too many things.
Honestly, it's probably, you know what? At this point, I think it's probably camp. Like if I were to do a drag performance, like maybe I would do that. Maybe I would do that scene into like something from Wicked.
Shit. Oh my God. Oh my God.
It's bad. It's bad.
Honestly. And speaking of that scene, like that capey kind of outfit before she's being transformed, I mean, standing alone, it's a very nice costume, but it makes no sense in the overall vocabulary, of which there is no consistent one. And it just kind of feels out of place in the setting. She looks like Snow White. Anyway. And even though this is more of a dialogue issue, I have to call out Oscar saying to Annie, what is this, gingham? And then she says, you know it is? Guys, that's dialogue? Come on. Could we get any more heavy-handed with this? I don't think so. The sound mixing in this made me want to punch. Like the blasting loudness of the creatures is supposed to scare us, I suppose, but it's just damn annoying. No. And I'm throwing things into this category that don't totally fit, but I'm talking about things you hear, okay? Things you hear.
Yeah, no, that's part of sound design.
I'm gonna stick voice and speech in here a little bit. First of all, wouldn't two sisters speak in the same accent? But okay, I'll skip it, I guess. Whatever.
Nope.
Next, I'm sorry to get a little bit like snooty BFA about this, but James Franco and Mila Kunis needed a little bit of voice and speech coaching. Like James Franco needed to work on a more period or at least neutral approach to Oscar speaking. And so did Mila Kunis, because like her extremely colloquial and modern sounding voice and speech, it diminishes the setting of the film. It doesn't sound period or fantastical or even neutral. And I actually really disliked the Mariah Carey end credit song, Almost Home. As a song, it's okay for end titles, but like what does the theme of this song have to do with what happened in this movie?
Oh, I skipped
Absolutely nothing.
I skipped it. I just, as soon as that movie ended, I just got the fuck out of there.
Oh no, I went down to the bitter end.
Oh.
Yeah, it did not fit. No. Nope.
For me, Everything is blue screen. Nothing is real. Like, it's bad. I can see the edges of the people, and where there is obviously a blue
The
screen.
edge,
The
yeah.
actors are so seldom interacting physically with their environment, which makes the contrast between the CGI backgrounds and the physical people even more startling. I think one of the best looking scenes is when Oscar is in that little pond area when the basket of the balloon hits the water and he's drowning, because they actually bothered to have a set and real water. And it's a shame because that was for such a little moment, and it's frustrating because,
Mm,
when you rely on CGI as your backgrounds, like as your set, as technology changes and progresses, it starts to look worse over time. And the worse it looks, the more the entire illusion of the film just falls apart. Like, this film is
mm.
just over 10 years old and it's already falling apart. And, the weird things that are happening in the editing with the camera, like, I know this kind of fits with like Sam Raimi's style, but it feels very out of place here in Oz. They're the weird like camera swing back and forth, the tilts, the weird Snow White moment, the black. There's even moments when the camera is like 60 degrees sideways, and I'm just like, why? Like, why? It doesn't feel motivated by the story or the world itself. It just feels like motivated by the director's personal style. The Munchkins song, woof. I'm not even going to say anything else. And then so many of the obvious like 3D gimmicks. This goes hand in hand with those scenes that feel like they're going on for too long or exist just for an effect/mood moment. I get that this film came out at a time when we were experimenting with bringing 3D technology to feature films, but like, my friends, there is so much posturing to the audience. Like, look at these snapping ropes in the balloon, or these weird violent nighttime flowers, or the water fairy that is so close to you and going to spit water, but don't worry, it's not going to spit water. Like, it feels like a theme park 4D film without any of the 4D effects. And in a
Mm-hmm.
film as ambitious as a prequel to The Wizard of Oz, in which we're explaining the backstory of the wizard's arrival, it's the wrong move to give so much time to these strange performative moments rather than focus on the mammoth of a story that you have to tell. And I said right what you said. The aesthetic of the world often feels more like Dr. Seuss than Oz. There are lots of
Thank
very
you.
impractical landscapes that don't even follow the actual map of Oz from the books.
Why do we abandon the source material of which there is so much? Like, why do you think you're going to come up with something better?
I don't know. Everything just feels ornamental. Like, it's made to be pretty and looked at, but that's it. This doesn't feel like a real world that people can live in outside of the castle in the south and the Emerald City, maybe. Everything else is just like wild jungle. And I think this comes from a larger gripe I have with the film, which is that it feels like we have a lot of people who are trying to put their own ideas onto Oz rather than starting with the source material and pulling something out. And as a result, a lot of things are clashing. Music, camera work, production design, direction, casting. Every department feels like they are just doing their own thing, and this is their chance to do Oz the way they always wanted to, except no one is listening to each other to make something that is, at the very least, cohesive. So, trash. Trash, mama. So that's everything that I have to say about that. Let's do final thoughts.
Okay. I feel like what is there left to say, but let's do that.
I'll do mine. If you're going to try to take on Oz, you have to make it real. You want the Dorothy like wonder from your audience when they come into Oz for the first time, then build Oz. Give us a real, well-crafted story that doesn't shy away from complicated themes. Create sets and puppets and effects that exist in a physical space for actors to interact with. Far and away, Disney's Return to Oz is the winner of this showdown for me because, successful or not, however you define that, the film is at least trying to do something. It has something to say, it has a well-executed and specific vision, and it's not taking the audience's love for the source material for granted. It's being bold enough to be different and give audiences something new to mull over. Oz the Great and Powerful is not a news story. As Tori, who runs the Oz Vlog account on Instagram, says, it's a story about a mediocre man failing upwards while a bunch of the most powerful women in one of the greatest and most feminist fantasy worlds ever created are simping over him.
Yes,
We've seen
Tori,
this time
yes.
and time again. It's tired, and let's be real, it's not Oz.
Ours are nearly identical, but I'll read mine anyway.
Do it.
If you're going to do Oz, you have to go for it with a really strong point of view on what Oz looks and feels like. And whether you agree with or enjoy the Oz of Return to Oz, there's no denying that it's clear and it's directly drawn from the source material. I know why the film exists, to bring stories from the other Oz books to the big screen and to, like you put so well, just like reflect what Dorothy is grappling with as she continues to grow up. I don't know what the point of Oz the Great and Powerful is in its current form. The concept was there, but ultimately, the movie ends with Oscar scoring another chick and succeeding in fooling everyone into thinking he deserves to be the wizard. But why do I care? Nothing is set up in this film that can then pay off as a fun realization moment upon rewatching The Wizard of Oz. My feelings about the wizard are unchanged. And knowing a bit about how this film came to be, one of the screenwriters and the person who the story is by, Mitchell Kapner, said that he had kind of always wanted to do a wizard backstory and felt like once Wicked came out, it was like he had kind of lost his chance. And I don't agree with that. Like I said, there are parts of that haven't been explored, but like in the way that this was done, yeah, you lost your chance because you didn't put up anything worthy. So you did lose your chance because you're not saying anything. You're not explaining things that we then get paid off in The Wizard of Oz. So I don't know why this movie exists. It's Return to Oz.
Yeah, it's Return to Oz. So there you have it, folks. We have taken the two Disney entries into the Oz universe. We have put them against each other and told you exactly why Oz the Great and Powerful is not worth your time. Just watch Return to Oz. Enjoy the dark fantasy of it all. Love all of the 80s glory of it, even if it makes
or
you
for
the
different
ick.
reasons. In some ways, or for different reasons. Skip them both, whatever.
Oh, no. No. Hateful. No, hateful. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Please remember to hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening to the podcast. That way all of our episodes download to your device. You don't miss out on anything. Then hit those 5 stars, leave a written review, and then share this with a friend so that we're seen in search results and other people find the podcast and we're growing and loving and blossoming and all that good shit that comes with a podcast that's in its 5th year trying hard. Please. That's everything I've got to say.
Yeah. Another great free way that you can support the podcast is by following us on social media. We are at Poor Unfortunate Podcast in most places that we could be. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Blue Sky, Threads. Come find us. Sharing a post there. Like I said, especially if you've got friends who aren't huge Disney people but love Oz, it would be so great if you could share this episode with them. And you can do that on social media because you can just send them anything from our Instagram, for example. And if you want even more Poor Unfortunate podcasts in your life, please join our private Facebook group, Poor Unfortunate Fam. We've got over 100 members in there. We talk about the episodes, we talk about Disney news, and it's just a great little piece of community in this world that is very hard sometimes. So we would love to meet you there. Or if you're not on Facebook, DM us or comment on our stuff. We won't email us, poorunfortunatepodcast@gmail.com. We want to talk to you. We want to interact with you. We want to form community with you. So come find us. We want to meet you and we want to give you the podcast that you enjoy.
And if you're looking for merch, we do have that available in the Poor Unfortunate shop. It's open, poorunfortunatepodcast.com/shop. We've got hats, water bottles, little drawstring bags. The drawstring bag, I think, might be my favorite thing. I use it a lot. I really, really like it. But yeah, if you're looking for some merch, or if you're heading to the parks or someplace and you want to, show some of your Poor Unfortunate pride, you can get some merch and do that. And as I always say, it does take us a little bit of money to keep the podcast up and running and coming to you. We do have a PayPal account. It is linked in our episode description and in the website links in our social media accounts. Truly, anything that you have to spare goes a long way for us. It could be $1, $5, $10. More than that, it could be a one-time donation. It could be a monthly donation. It all just goes right back into the podcast, helping us keep it free and ad-free for the most part. I mean, like, how many podcasts are there right now that you get completely ad-free? Let's be real.
True.
And to all of our monthly donors who make this possible, thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Thank you.
We see you. We love you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We love you.
Alrighty, that's going to do it for us for this episode. We will be back with a new episode of Caroline, What's New? And then our tips and tricks episode where we go through the Bath & Body Works Disney Princess Collection. We're so excited.
God.
So get ready for that. And until then,
Beluga
Beluga Savruga.